everybody, welcome to another video. Hope you're ready to flex those brain muscles. Today we're going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations. Real quick before we start though, this is my 30th video uploaded to this channel. So thank everyone for the support. Everyone supported me. Thank you so much. If you enjoy my videos, make sure to hit subscribe and go check out those other 29 videos as well. Maybe they'll help you. So let's go ahead and get right into it. This is the first video. I'm going to make a series of solving quadratic equations, and we're going to use different methods. In this video we are going to solve them by factoring, which is the most common method of solving these, and also usually the first thing you want to try whenever you just see a quadratic equation and you want to solve it. The first thing you should always try to do is factor it. At least that's what I do. So these are the methods to solve them. Right now we're solving by factoring. So let's just do a quick introduction. Quadratic equations. Equation implies we have an equals, right? And we have two sides of this equation. Quadratic equations are of this form, and we've already seen this part when we factored trinomials. So basically it's just a trinomial with equals 0 at the end, basically, you know. So we're going to use factoring. If you're not good at factoring, you need more practice, you can click up here. I have some videos on factoring, but from here on I'm going to assume you know how to factor a little bit. So let's go and get right into an example and see how we can solve this by factoring. And again, when we're solving these, we're looking for values we can substitute in for x to make this true. What can we substitute in for x that will make this side equal to 0, right? And a lot of times, I would say most of the time when you solve these, there are two answers for x, but there can be one and there can even be no real solution. So that is an option, but usually you'll have two solutions. So let's go and get right into it. We'll factor this. This is a trinomial where a equals 1, so I can just use my multiply add method. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be -6 and add to be -1. So I'm going to break up 6, and the factors of 6 are 6 and 1 and 3 and 2. And I think I can use this 3 and 2 if I do -3 plus 2. -3 plus 2. So that's what's going to be inside my parentheses here. So x minus 3, x plus 2 equals 0. So now this is the key, and this is the idea of how this works to solve these, because now I have two things being multiplied, right? X minus 3 times x plus 2. And I'm trying to find out when this is equal to 0. The only way this can be equal to 0, two things being multiplied, is either this has to be 0 or this has to be 0. So I basically set this first part equal to 0. So I have x minus 3 equals 0. And I set this second part equal to 0 because these are the two possibilities for when that whole thing can be 0. It's either this is 0 or this is 0. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the way I think of it. That's the way I was explained this. And now I just solve these two different equations. So I can subtract 2 from both sides from this one. -2, that cancels that, and I'm left with x equals -2. So this is one of my solutions. And then here I'm supposed to, let's see, add 3 to both sides. I need to get that x by itself. Add 3 to both sides. So then these 3's cancel, and I get x equals +3. X equals 3. So these are my two solutions. Alright, so let me just say, for this method to work, to solve these by factoring, this equals 0, very important. You have to have 0 on one side. If I left this 8 here and somehow factored this and said, well, that means this equals 8 or this equals 8, that's not true. That's not a true statement, right? That only works when 0 is on this side. So anytime you have something like this, you need to rearrange it so it equals 0. So I'm just going to move this 8 over here by subtracting 8 from both sides. So -8 from this side, and then -8 from this side. And that's going to leave me with x squared plus 7x minus 8 equals 0. Now I can solve this by factoring it. So again, I just have a trinomial where a equals 1, so I'm just looking for two numbers that multiply together to be 8 and add together to be +7. So what do I have? 8 and 1 and 4 and 2. And I think it's going to end up being +8 minus 1. So what I'm left with in here is x plus 8, x minus 1. And again, if you're any bit confused on how I got these, go check out my videos on factoring trinomials. So now, same idea. This times this equals 0, so that means either this equals 0 or this equals 0. So I set up two little equations. I have x minus 1 equals 0, and I solve this one for x. And here I have x plus 8 equals 0, and I solve this for x. So just doing a little bit of algebra. Here I add 1 to both sides, plus 1 plus 1, and that leaves me with x equals 1. And then here, same thing, a little bit of algebra, minus 8, minus 8. Just got to get that x by itself. That will cancel those 8s, and I'm left with x equals negative 8, and these are the two solutions to this equation. All right, so as we see, it's a lot of factoring, and that's really the only thing that makes solving these difficult, is just the factoring gets harder. But as long as you have some method for factoring trinomials, like the AC method is what I personally use, there's the X method, I think there's a box method, right? As long as you're comfortable factoring trinomials, you'll be able to solve these by factoring. So again, I'm setting up 0 on one side, so I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Minus 5 to this side, that gets rid of the 5 and gets me the 0 there. Minus 5 to this side. So I'm left with 2x squared plus 9x minus 5 equals 0. Now I'm going to use the AC method because this a is not equal to 1, so I'm going to use the AC method. And what I do with this method is I take a times c, which a is this, c is this, right? So 2 times negative 5, that is negative 10. And I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 10 and add together to give me positive 9. And I'm looking to break this up. So let's see what I can do here. I think that's going to be 10 and negative 1. Positive 10 and negative 1. That's going to give me my positive 9 I need. So two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 10, that checks out, and add together to give me positive 9, that checks out as well. And what I use these numbers for is I'm going to split up this middle term. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2x squared plus 10x minus x minus 5. And now I can factor by grouping. So I'm going to take a 2x out of these first two terms. I can factor out a 2x, and I'm left with x plus 5. And from here, I'm basically going to factor out a negative 1 because I want this to be x plus 5. I want these to match up. So look what happens when I factor out a negative 1. And again, if you have no idea what I'm doing, I have a video on the AC method as well. But if you use the X method, whatever method you use, as long as you get to this correctly factored trinomial. So now I can pull this x plus 5 out to the front, basically is what I'm doing. I'm factoring out the x plus 5 to the front. And you see how I pulled out that negative 1 and basically just took out the negative from in front of these. If I put this back in, I get right back to where I was up there. So that's good to go here. So I pulled this out and I'm left with the 2x. And maybe you could have gotten this faster by just brute force method, like kind of just guess and check. But as the numbers get bigger, you always want to have some kind of tool that's better than guess and check. Guess and check is not reliable when the numbers get crazy, you know. So, all right, this equals 0. So that means I set x plus 5 equal to 0. So I'll have equation 1, x plus 5 equals 0. Equation 2, what do I have here? 2x minus 1 equals 0. So now I solve each one of these for x, and then those are my two solutions for x. So this I subtract 5 from both sides, and I'm left with x equals negative 5. So that's one solution. And then here I'm going to add 1 to both sides, plus 1, and I'm left with 2x equals 1. So I have one more step. I need to isolate x, so I divide both sides by 2. That's going to cancel this, and I'm left with x equals 1/2. So these are my two solutions for x. X equals negative 5 and x equals 1/2. And look, you can always test these, by the way. If I plug in negative 5 to here, to this one, I should plug in negative 5 here. I get 2 times 25, that's 50. Let me write 50. Plus 9 times negative 5, that's negative 45. Minus 5, that's 50 minus 50, that's 0, right? So that's a way you can check your answer, and that would work for 1/2 as well. All right, this will be our last example because it's a little different. In this case, our c is 0, right? We just have two terms here, so it can maybe throw us off a little, but we're going to see that it's the same process. You just factor it. So how I'm going to factor this is I'm going to just take out the common factor, which is x. So if I take out an x, look what happens. X, that comes out front, and I'm left with x minus 9, right? And I could check my answer by putting that x back in. I get right back to where I came from. So now look, I have two things being multiplied that are equal to 0. So can't I just set this first thing equal to 0, this guy here equal to 0, and this second thing here equal to 0. Same process, except here we just have an x instead of a binomial, right? Which actually makes it easier. So our first solution is x equals 0, and that's already solved for us, right? And then our second solution, let's see, x minus 9 equals 0. So by adding 9 to both sides, I can get x equals positive 9. So I have x equals 0 and x equals 9 as my solutions for this quadratic equation. So as we can see, it's just a bunch of factoring. Just make sure you have your factoring down, and then practice some examples with this, and you'll get it down. So hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it helped you. If it did, leave a like button. Make sure to subscribe as well, and I'll see you in the next video. We'll flex those brain muscles and make some brain gains. Later.